A Thursday morning before the world remembers to wake. Fog rolling off the coast in slow, heavy waves, swallowing the edges of a town that had no business existing on any map he had ever studied. A place built for people who wanted to stop being found. At exactly 5:47 a.m., the man who controlled the narcotics corridor across 6 territories stood at the end of a gravel path, his dark overcoat carrying the weight of 12 hours on the road. His eyes locked on a cottage door painted the color of rust and forgetting. He had not knocked. He was not sure he knew how. Not here. Not at this door. Through the thin walls, sound traveled. The creak of a floorboard under small weight. Something ceramic placed on a counter with the carelessness of routine. Then, laughter, sudden and bright and reckless, the kind that only comes from a throat that has never learned what danger sounds like. His jaw tightened, his pulse, usually a thing of mechanical precision, stumbled. The door opened before he was ready for it. She stood in the frame like something the fog had tried to hide and failed. Barefoot on cold wood, hair pulled into a loose knot, a woolen cardigan hanging off one shoulder, flour dusted across her collarbone like she had been making something with her hands at an hour when most people were still dreaming. Saris. 3 years, 5 months, and 9 days since he last saw her face. He had counted. Not because he wanted to, but because the number refused to stop growing inside him, ticking forward every morning like a debt he could not settle. She looked different. Not older exactly, but distilled, like everything unnecessary had been stripped away, and what remained was harder, quieter, built from something he did not recognize. Then he saw the child. A girl, small, maybe 3, perched on Saris's left hip with the casual certainty of someone who had claimed that spot long ago and never intended to surrender it. Wild dark curls falling into a face that was already too sharp, too aware for her age. She was watching him the way animals watch movement at the edge of a clearing. Not afraid. Deciding. And then the girl turned her head fully toward him, and the breath left his lungs like it had been stolen. Her eyes. Deep amber, ringed with gold. His mother's eyes. His eyes. The same ones that stared back at him every morning, from mirrors he increasingly avoided. The ground shifted beneath him in every way that mattered. Then movement behind Saris's leg. A second child, a boy. Partially hidden, one hand gripping the fabric of her cardigan. He did not step forward. He did not peek around her the way curious children do. He simply stood in her shadow, watching through the narrow gap between her arm and her body, his gaze steady, patient, calculating in a way that should not exist in someone barely old enough to form full sentences. The boy's eyes were different. Dark, almost black, reflective Saris's eyes. But the face beneath them, the bone structure, the set of the jaw, the way stillness sat on him like a suit tailored to fit that was unmistakably his. 2. There were 2 of them. The realization detonated behind his ribs, fracturing something he had spent years holding together with nothing but control and fury and the refusal to stop searching. His hands, the same hands that had signed execution orders without flinching, began to shake at his sides. His lips parted. Her name started to form, broken, barely audible. Saris. You need to leave. Her voice cut through the fog like it had been sharpened against years of silence. No hesitation, no tremor, just a flat, practiced finality. The girl tilted her head. Mama, who is he? The question landed somewhere deep in his chest and detonated a second time. Nobody, Saris said, her gaze fixed on him. He's looking for a different house. But there's no other house this way, the girl replied, already catching the lie with an instinct she had inherited from both of them. Go inside, Saris said to them. Softer now, but firm. The voice of a woman who had learned to be every wall her children would ever need. The girl obeyed reluctantly, twisting to look back at him over her mother's shoulder. The boy followed without looking back at all. Then it was just Saris, her hand on the edge of the door, her body positioned between him and everything that mattered. You found me, she said. Not a question, an accusation. I never stopped looking. Something flickered across her face, too fast to name. Then it was gone. Then you wasted 3 years. The door closed. Not slammed, pulled shut with a deliberate, devastating calm. The lock turned, a small metallic sound that echoed through the fog like a sentence being handed down. Behind the door, silence. Then the girl's voice, muffled but clear enough to reach him. Mama, why does he look like he's going to cry? A pause. Long enough for something inside him to crack from end to end. Then Saris's voice, quieter, thinner, carrying a weight the child could not yet understand. He's not crying, baby. Another pause. He just got here too late. He did not leave. He should have. Every instinct built into a man of his position demanded it. Pride, strategy, the fundamental understanding that power only works when you are willing to walk away from anything. He had walked away from burning alliances, from men begging for their lives, from deals worth more than most countries' annual budgets. But he could not walk away from a rust-colored door in a town that smelled like salt and wood smoke and a life he had never been allowed to want. He lowered himself onto the front step. The wood was damp, groaning under his weight like it was not built for men who carried the things he carried. He sat with his forearms on his knees, his hands clasped loosely, his head slightly bowed. Not defeated, not yet, but close. Inside, he could hear fragments, Cirrus moving through the kitchen, the girl's voice, always asking questions. Is he still there? Don't worry about it, but he's sitting on our step. I know. Is he cold? A pause. Longer than it should have been. I don't know. We could give him the blue blanket. The one with the holes. We don't use it. A child he had never held was offering him a blanket through a closed door. The simplicity of it was more devastating than any violence he had ever witnessed or ordered. The boy said nothing. But Soren could feel the child's attention like a frequency, low and constant, directed at the door, processing what the adults would not explain. Hours passed. The fog thinned, revealing pieces of the town in reluctant increments. A stone wall, a clothesline, the mast of a small boat tilting in a harbor he could not yet see. A man walked past on the road below, older, weathered, carrying a net over one shoulder. He glanced at Soren, his steps slowing just enough to register the incongruity. A man in a wool overcoat that cost more than most homes on this road, sitting on a damp step in a fishing village at 7 in the morning. He didn't stop. People in places like this had learned not to ask questions they didn't want the answers to. By midday, the town had registered his presence the way coastal places register changes in weather, not with alarm, but with a quiet adjustment. People passed the cottage at a slightly wider angle. Conversations near the harbor dipped half a tone when someone glanced toward the porch. No one approached. Something about the way he held himself made that impossible, even here, in a place untouched by his world. Inside, the girl appeared at the window. Small hands pressed against the glass, her breath leaving circles of fog that expanded and shrank. She was watching him with the honest fascination of someone who had not yet learned that some things were supposed to be feared. Then Saris's hand appeared on her shoulder, pulling her away. The curtain fell back into place. He had imagined this moment for 3 years. In the early months, obsessively, versions that always ended with forgiveness arriving like something owed. Later, the fantasies grew quieter, less about reunion, more about simply confirming she was alive. He had never imagined this. The children, the door, the word nobody spoken in a voice that did not waver. He had never imagined being erased so completely by someone who once fell asleep with her fingers intertwined in his. But behind that door were 2 people who carried his blood and her courage. Whatever they had been to each other had not ended the night she vanished. It had multiplied. The boy's face appeared at a lower window. Dark eyes, unreadable, ancient in a face still round with childhood. He just looked, absorbing, cataloging, and filing something away. Then he was gone. And Soren stayed. Because the man who had never waited for anything in his life had just discovered the only thing worth waiting for. The night everything shattered did not begin with a warning. It began with music. I remember the way it moved through the estate. woven into the air like it had always been there. Strings and something lower beneath them, a bass note you felt in your chest before your ears could name it. The gala was his, of course. Everything was his. The estate, the guests, the chandelier light falling across 300 faces that smiled because it was safer than doing anything else. I had helped plan it. Every detail, every seat, and every calculated gesture of hospitality that was really a demonstration of reach. That was my role, not just his wife, but his architect. The woman who turned power into something presentable. I was supposed to be beside him that night. But the dizziness had started 3 days earlier. Faint at first, then deeper, pulling at me from the inside, in a way I could not explain. Soren had noticed. He pressed his hand to my forehead, his thumb tracing my temple, and told me to rest. His voice was the one he saved for me alone, stripped of the authority that made other men's hands tremble. "I'll handle the night," he said. "You handle yourself." I leaned into his touch because I still trusted it. Because the idea that something could break between us felt as impossible as the sky deciding not to exist. I rested. But something would not let me settle a restlessness that had no name, an instinct tapping at the back of my mind like a finger against glass. I got dressed anyway. The gown was dark green. The one he once said made the room rearrange itself around me. I checked my reflection once. The woman looking back at me appeared calm, composed, and certain. She had no idea. I searched for him the way I always did, with the quiet radar of a woman who had learned to locate one man in any room simply by the way the air shifted around him. He was not on the main floor, not near the East Terrace, not with Constantin, his lieutenant, his second voice, the man who shadowed him so closely they sometimes looked like one creature split in two. Someone gestured toward the upper corridor. The private wing. Our wing. The walk from the staircase to the bedroom door took 42 steps. I know because I have counted them in my memory 1,000 times since, trying to find the exact step where I should have turned around. I never found it. Every single one led forward. The hallway was too quiet. The door to our room was open just enough, 3 inches, maybe 4, the kind of gap that could have been accidental but was not. I could hear breathing before I reached it. Not his alone. My hand found the door. Some part of me, the last surviving part that still believed in the life I had built, whispered, "Do not open this." I opened it. He was on the bed. Our bed. The sheets I had chosen. The space where I had fallen asleep against his chest so many times I had stopped counting. And Merritt was with him. Merritt. My closest friend. The woman I had trusted with the fears I could not give to anyone else. The small, fragile human things I kept hidden beneath the armor of being his wife. She knew where every crack in me lived. Her dark hair spread across his chest, her hand resting on his shoulder with a familiarity that made my stomach revolt. His arm around her, loose, heavy, wrong in a way that rewrote every memory I had of that arm around me. Time did not stop. That is what people say, but it is a lie. Time continued, cruelly, precisely, forcing me to absorb every detail in sequence. I saw everything. The way his breathing was slow and uneven, not quite right, not quite him, though I did not understand that part yet. I did not scream. I did not cry. I stood in the doorway and felt something inside me go quiet, in a way that was not peace. It was extinction. The part of me that loved him simply stopped existing, like a flame deprived of air. No drama, no sound, just gone. Marette turned first. Slowly, as if she had been expecting this moment. Her eyes found mine, and in them I saw something I will never forget. Not guilt, not surprise. Satisfaction. The quiet, triumphant satisfaction of someone who has been building toward a single moment and has finally watched it land. She almost smiled. Almost. Soren's eyes opened next. Unfocused. Heavy. Delayed in a way I registered but could not yet interpret. When he saw me, something in his expression shattered, fast, violent, real, but it was too late. Ceres. My name in his mouth sounded like something dying. I closed the door. Gently, the way you close a casket. His voice followed me through the wood, rising, cracking. My name repeated like it could undo what had been done. Footsteps behind the door, the handle turning. But I was already gone. The woman who had stood beside him, who had built his empire's public face with her own hands, she died in that hallway, between one heartbeat and the next. And the woman who walked away did not look back. She had nothing left to look back for. I did not run. Running is what people do when they are afraid. And I was not afraid. I was something worse. I was empty. I walked back through the upper corridor with the posture of a woman who had somewhere important to be, every step calibrated to the rhythm of someone who belongs, because the moment you move differently in a house full of people trained to notice, you become a problem. The gala still pulsed below me. 300 people drinking champagne, none of them aware that the woman they had nodded to an hour ago was already disappearing. I went to the operations room on the third floor, the one Soren thought I used only for event planning. He never checked it closely. Men like him always underestimate the infrastructure they let their wives build, assuming the machinery of a home is smaller than the machinery of an empire. It is not. It is the same machinery with different labels. I had prepared for this. Not for this specifically, but for the possibility that one day, the world I lived in would decide I was expendable. I had watched too many women in this life learn that lesson too late. The go bag was behind the false panel in the bottom drawer. Cash, enough for months. A prepaid phone, never activated. Clean clothes. Identification belonging to a person who did not exist, arranged 18 months ago through a contact Soren did not know I had. I changed quickly. The green gown pooled on the floor like something shed. I unclipped the earrings he had given me on our second anniversary and left them on the desk. One thing I kept. My mother's ring, a thin band of white gold worn smooth by decades of her hands, working, building, surviving. She had died before I married him. Sometimes I wondered if that was mercy. The security rotation shifted at 11:40 p. I had designed that rotation. I knew the blind corridors, the camera angles, the 17 seconds between the East Garden sweep and the gate monitor refresh. I had built this system to keep threats out. Now I walked through its gaps like water through a net. The service exit near the greenhouse opened onto a gravel path behind the perimeter wall. No cameras, no sensors. I had argued against placing them there once, claiming the terrain was too uneven for reliable coverage. Soren had agreed because he had never once imagined those reasons might serve me instead of him. The air outside was sharp, metallic with autumn cold. I inhaled it like a first breath. Behind me, the estate glowed against the night sky, full of people who would not notice my absence for hours. I chose the oldest sedan in the staff lot and started the engine with hands that did not shake. Not because I was brave, but because shaking requires feeling, and I had shut that down completely. The city shrank in the rearview mirror. Lights thinning, buildings lowering, the skyline becoming a silhouette, then a glow, then nothing. I drove south. No destination, no map, just the hum of the engine and the absolute certainty that I could never go back. Soren had never raised a hand to me. That was never the danger. The danger was accepting that I had been replaceable, that trust was a decoration hung on a wall that had always been hollow behind it. I should have felt something then. Grief, anger, rage, anything. But there was nothing. Just a hollow stillness, like my body had decided to shut down everything that could hurt me. The road stretched ahead, empty and dark, and I let it carry me the way a current carries something that has stopped trying to swim. The car lasted until somewhere past the third fuel stop, a nowhere stretch of highway bordered by fields that had no names. I left it at the shoulder, wiped what needed wiping, and kept moving on foot. The ground rough beneath my shoes, the air colder with every step. Stopping meant thinking, thinking meant feeling, and feeling was not something I could afford. And somewhere behind me, in a house of glass and power, A man whose voice I could still hear saying my name was about to discover that the most dangerous thing he had ever built was not his empire. It was the woman he taught to think like him. I moved through 3 towns in 4 days, switching buses and routes, paying cash, leaving no pattern. By the time the last bus pulled into Harrow Cove, I had shed every traceable layer of the woman I used to be. The town spread before me in miniature. Stone cottages with salt-bleached walls, a harbor where fishing boats knocked gently against each other in the tide, a single pub with fogged windows, a post office that doubled as a grocery store, a place where strangers were noticed but not questioned unless they gave reason to be. I gave no reason. The pottery workshop was at the end of the harbor road, a converted boathouse with wide windows facing the sea. I did not plan to enter it, but the door was open, and the warmth that poured out carried something I had not felt in days, an invitation that asked for nothing in return. Zora was inside. Older, broad-shouldered, her hands stained with slip, her silver hair cut short, her face carved by wind and years into something that looked like honesty. She watched me stand in the doorway for a full 5 seconds before she spoke. "You look like someone who needs to use her hands." Not a question, not a greeting, just an observation so precise it bypassed every wall I had built. "I need work," I said. "Can you wake up before the tide comes in?" "I can wake up before anything." Something passed between us, not warmth exactly, but recognition. The kind shared between women who have survived things they do not need to name. There's a room upstairs. Ceiling leaks when the wind comes from the north, but the bed is clean and the door has a lock. No references, no identification, no forms. I stayed. The work rebuilt me from the outside in. My hands learned the language of clay, how to center it, how to pull it upward without forcing, how to feel when it was ready. Zora taught without lecturing. She placed her hands over mine once, adjusted my pressure, and said, "You're holding it like you're afraid it'll leave. It won't. Not if you let it be what it is." I almost broke then. Almost let the metaphor reach the place inside me where everything I was suppressing still lived and breathed. But I held it together, with precision and silence and the absolute refusal to feel anything that might slow me down. Weeks passed. The rhythm of the town wove itself into my bones. Wake before dawn, walk to the workshop in salt-heavy air. Shape, glaze, fire, repeat. Eat simply, speak sparingly. Exist without footprint, without echo, without the kind of presence that leaves traces for men with resources to follow. At night, I lay in the small bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the town settle into sleep, counting every breath like it was proof I had made it through another day without being found. The sea murmured beyond the harbor wall, constant and indifferent, and I let it fill the space where memories tried to surface. No one came. No black cars on the harbor road. No strangers asking careful questions. The absence of pursuit should have been relief. Instead, it felt like a held breath, like the silence before a sound that has not yet decided whether to arrive. Then the nausea came. It started on a Tuesday, sudden and absolute, bending me over the work table. I gripped the edge, clay still wet on my fingers, and waited for it to pass. It returned the next morning, and the next, each time sharper, more insistent, more impossible to explain away. I knew before the doctor confirmed it. The clinic was a 2-room building near the church, run by a man named Hadian who moved slowly, spoke carefully, and asked only what was necessary. "About 7 weeks," he said. "Maybe 8. I sat in the plastic chair with my hands flat on my knees and felt the world rearrange itself around a new axis. Pregnant, carrying the biological proof of a man I had erased from my existence. A living connection to a life I could never return to, forming inside me without my permission. I walked back along the harbor road and felt something crack beneath the numbness for the first time. Not grief, something more primal, fear. Because if this child arrived with his eyes or his jaw or any of the markers that made him recognizable to every person in 6 territories, then disappearing was no longer just about me. It was about someone who had not yet been born and already carried a target they would never understand. I stopped at the harbor wall, placed my hand flat against my stomach, and felt the stakes become infinite. The gale came off the Atlantic on the longest night of the year, howling through Harrow Cove like something that had been building fury across 3,000 miles of open water. I remember the sound more than anything, not just wind, but a physical weight against the walls, rattling the windows, sending vibrations through the floor. The power went out at 9. After that, it was just darkness, candlelight, and the sound of the world tearing itself apart. The first contraction hit at 10:30. Sharp, absolute, and far too early. Hadion had said I had 3 weeks remaining. My body had a different schedule. The second contraction came 7 minutes later, then 5, then 3. The acceleration was decisive, like something that had already made up its mind. Zora drove. Her truck shuddered against the wind, headlights cutting narrow paths through sideways rain. I sat with both hands braced against the dashboard, my breathing fracturing into shorter intervals. The clinic was dark, but Hadion was already there, his face lit by a lantern, his expression carrying the calm of a man who understood that nature does not wait for convenience. Inside, everything became immediate. Candlelight turned the room amber. Zora's hand gripped mine. Hadion moved with quiet certainty, his voice a low constant beneath the chaos. And then, suddenly, a sound that cut through the gale like it did not care that the world was falling apart. A cry. Not small, not tentative. A full-throated, furious declaration of arrival. My daughter. Hadion placed her on my chest, and the world contracted to the size of her body. She was impossibly small and impossibly loud, her fists clenching and unclenching against my skin like she was already reaching for something to claim. Then she opened her eyes. Amber. Deep, liquid amber, ringed with gold that caught the candlelight and threw it back like a challenge. His eyes, not a suggestion, a perfect, undeniable inheritance staring up at me from a face that was otherwise entirely new. 3,000 miles. 5 months of hiding. Every precaution I had taken, and here she was, looking at me with his exact gaze like distance was a concept she had never agreed to respect. I almost shattered, but there was no time. There's another one, Hadion said, his voice carrying a note I had not heard from him before. Not alarm. Surprise. Another. He arrived 12 minutes later with something closer to deliberation, a single quiet sound, more observation than protest, as if he had spent the journey deciding how he felt about the destination and concluded it was acceptable. He did not cry again. He simply existed, his small body settling against mine with a stillness that felt older than his seconds of life should have allowed. His hair was dark, his features sharper than hers, carrying a geometry I recognized but that had not yet fully formed. When his eyes opened, they were dark, nearly black. My eyes, my mother's eyes, the eyes of women who watched and waited and understood things long before they spoke them. Twins. 2 children where I had prepared for one. 2 heartbeats against my chest, one fierce and demanding, one steady and sure. Did you know? Zora asked, her voice rough, her eyes red in a way she would deny later. I shook my head. Language had abandoned me for something more fundamental, the space where survival becomes devotion and fear becomes a ferocity, so complete it rewrites everything you understood about yourself. I named the girl Veda knowledge, truth, understanding that cannot be unlearned. I named the boy Emric old, steady, a name that carries quiet authority, Veda and Emric. My reason and my ruin. Because if Soren ever discovered they existed, he would not see children. He would see legacy. He would see continuation. He would see 2 lives that belonged to his bloodline and therefore, in his world, belonged to him. The storm broke before dawn. The silence that followed felt temporary, like the world holding its breath. I held them closer and made a promise I intended to keep. But even as I pressed my lips against Veda's forehead and felt Emrich's fingers curl around my thumb, something deeper whispered what I did not want to hear. Men like him always find what belongs to them. The estate did not feel different immediately. That was the cruelest part. For the first hour after the gala ended, everything appeared exactly as it should have. Order maintained, power intact. Then he went looking for her. The green gown was on the floor of the operations room, her earrings on the desk, the drawer open, the false panel exposed, its contents gone. He stood in the doorway staring at these objects until the silence shifted from absence to accusation. She had not left in panic. She had executed an exit strategy built inside his own walls, using his own infrastructure, and he had never seen it. That realization arrived with something cold, something closer to awe, and it lodged in his chest like a blade turned sideways. He watched the security footage frame by frame, her walking through corridors she had designed, bypassing systems she had built, disappearing through exits she had argued into existence. She had constructed a door in his fortress and walked through it. He sent Constantine first, his lieutenant, his shadow, 9 years at his right hand. Find her. Quietly. No trail, no damage. Constantine returned with nothing. Weeks of nothing. Months of nothing. Professional trackers, digital surveillance, networks of informants spanning half the continent, all producing silence. She had vanished with a thoroughness that should have been impossible for someone without his resources. That impossibility gnawed at him. Not because he doubted her capability, he had always known she was brilliant, but because disappearing this completely required more than intelligence. It required planning that predated the night itself, which meant either she had always intended to leave, or someone had helped her. He could not accept the first option, so he began examining the second. The night itself became his obsession. Not the image of Marette, though that replayed with a clarity that felt engineered, but the hours surrounding it. The gaps. He remembered Constantine handing him a drink he did not recall requesting. He remembered the drink, and then very little else with any reliability. That fracture in his memory became the thread he pulled. He began with the drink. Who poured it? Who carried it? Who had access? The answers came slowly. A bartender hired for that single evening and never seen again. A pharmaceutical compound designed to suppress inhibition and fragment short-term memory while leaving the body technically functional. He followed the compound backward through 3 intermediaries. The third talked, the way all men do when the person asking has stopped caring about anything except the answer. The name that emerged was not Maret's, it was Constantine's. The revelation materialized like something rising from deep water. Constantine, who had access to every system, every schedule, every vulnerability. Constantine, who had suggested the gala's timing, the staffing changes, the drink. Constantine, who had recruited Marette not as a lover but as a weapon. Marette had been leveraged, her family's debts held over her head by a man who understood that the cheapest way to destroy an empire was to remove the one person who made the emperor human. Without Ceres, Sorin would destabilize. Without his anchor and strategist, the structure would fracture, and Constantine would inherit the pieces. Elegant, patient, and it had worked almost perfectly. Almost. Because Constantine had assumed losing Ceres would weaken Sorin. Instead, it focused him into something far more dangerous, a man with nothing left to protect and nothing left to restrain him. The dismantling was methodical, operations redirected, loyalties reassigned. The financial infrastructure Constantine had been positioning himself to control was hollowed out, account by account, until the man who planned a quiet coup found himself standing on ground that no longer existed. Constantine disappeared on a Wednesday. Not violently, not publicly, but completely erased in the same quiet way he had tried to erase someone else's life. Marette wept when he found her, and the weeping confirmed everything. She had been used, threatened into a role she could not refuse. He let her go. She had been a tool, not an architect. But none of it the truth, The justice, the restored empire, changed the single fact that consumed him. Saris was still gone, and she believed something about him that had never been true. That belief was a wall he could not breach with power. Because the lie she carried was not about what she had seen. It was about who she believed he was. He had to find her, and then he had to wait for her to let him speak. The first part, he knew how to do. The second terrified him more than any enemy ever had. It was not a face that found her. It was a pattern. 18 months into the search, Soren shifted his approach. He stopped looking for her name, her image, her digital presence. Instead, he looked for her mind, the traces she would leave because she could not help being who she was. Saris had always drawn the same design when she was thinking, a spiral that began tight at the center and loosened as it expanded outward. She drew it on napkins during meetings, in the margins of planning documents, on the condensation of glasses when her mind was somewhere else. Unconscious, involuntary, a signature she did not know she was leaving. One of his analysts found it on a ceramics marketplace. A shallow bowl, glazed in slate gray with that exact spiral carved into the interior. No artist name, no identifying information, just a shipping origin tagged to a postal code on the Atlantic coast. He told no one. This was not an operation. It was something that existed outside the machinery of his world, and it required him to step outside it too. The drive took 11 hours, too long and not long enough at the same time. The highways narrowed into regional roads, then single lanes bordered by stone walls and overgrown hedges, the landscape shedding every trace of the urban world with each passing mile. He did not slow down. He did not question it. If she had chosen this place, it meant she had believed it was far enough. It was. By the time he reached Harrow Cove, the sky was still dark, the kind of early morning that belongs to people who wake before the world does. The town appeared through sea fog like something half-imagined. Small, quiet, forgettable. Nothing about it matched the life she had once lived, and yet everything about it felt deliberate, like she had chosen it because it erased everything that came before. He parked where the road ended, sat in the silence, let the engine cool, while his pulse did the opposite. 3 years of searching had led to this point, and now something inside him resisted, not fear of what he would find, but fear of what she would see when she looked at him. He stepped out into the cold. The air carried salt, and the faint smell of seaweed at low tide. He walked through the town in the early dark, following the harbor road toward the workshop, where faint light pushed through wide windows and the smell of something mineral drifted into the morning. He stood outside and watched the shadow moving within a rhythm he recognized, the particular gravity of a woman who had once commanded rooms simply by entering them, still present even here, even in a place that should have diminished her, but clearly hadn't. He walked to the cottage. A gravel path, a rust-colored door, a porch that creaked. The fog wrapped around him. He waited, and the door opened. Everything after that, the children, the amber eyes, the word nobody, the door closing like a verdict he had already lived it. Standing on this same porch, in a moment that now connected to this one, like a circle finally closing. He sat on the steps. The fog soaked through his coat. The town woke around him, and the only person who could explain what his life now meant had locked the door between them. He did not leave that day, or the next, or the one after that. By the fourth morning, his presence had become a kind of weather, something the town registered without fully understanding. He sat on the steps at dawn. He moved to the harbor wall when the tide came in. He returned at evening. He did not approach the door again. He did not call her name. He simply remained. Inside, Saris felt him the way you feel pressure changes before a storm. She moved through her routines with deliberate precision, shaping clay, feeding the children, maintaining the structure of a life built on the assumption he would never find her. That assumption was now sitting on her porch. Veda made it worse. She pressed her face against the window and narrated his presence like a weather report. He's still sitting there, Mama. I know. Does he eat? I haven't seen him eat. That's not our concern. But what if he falls over? People fall over when they don't eat. Zora told me that. Irrefutable logic, stripped of context, free of history, aimed at the simplest truth available. Emmerich said nothing about the man outside. He watched his mother instead, tracking the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands pressed too hard into the clay. He was building an understanding from the inside out, and whatever conclusion he was approaching, he kept it to himself. On the fifth evening, Saris opened the door. She stepped onto the porch, arms crossed, face composed, and found him exactly where she expected him. He looked up with the measured calm of someone who had trained himself to hold still, even when everything inside him was moving. Silence. Long enough for the sea to send 3 waves against the harbor wall. "You said something through the door," she began. "The first day. You said it wasn't what I thought." He nodded once. "Then explain. And if you lie to me, I will take them so far that the next 3 years will feel like a weekend." The threat was structural, built into her voice the way load-bearing walls are built into foundations. "Constantine," he said. The name landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. "He planned it. All of it. The gala, the timing, the drink he handed me that night that I don't remember asking for." She didn't move, but something behind her eyes recalibrated. "I was drugged, Saris. A compound designed to suppress control, fragment memory, and leave the body present while removing the mind's ability to direct it. I didn't choose what you saw." "And Moret?" The name tasted like ash in her mouth. She said it anyway. "Leveraged. Constantine held her family's debts, threatened her brother's placement in a program she couldn't afford to lose. She was a tool. Not willing, but functional." "You're telling me my best friend was blackmailed into my husband's bed by his own lieutenant?" "Yes, and Constantine orchestrated this to push me out so he could take over. I'm telling you what I found after 3 months of dismantling every connection he thought he had erased. I'm telling you what the evidence confirmed. And I'm telling you that Constantine no longer exists in any capacity to deny it." The weight of that last sentence landed not as a threat, but as a fact. A concluded chapter. Something final in the air that did not leave room for follow-up questions about method or mercy. She stared at him for a long time. Not searching for deception, but for the version of events that aligned with the parts of that night she had never been able to reconcile. His eyes in the doorway. Confused, disoriented, horrified in a way that lagged behind reality. His voice chasing her down the hallway, desperate, not commanding. She had buried those inconsistencies for 3 years. If what she had seen was not what had actually occurred, then every decision since every mile, every wall, and every night alone rested on a foundation that had just been removed. 3 years, she said, her steadiness cracking at last. 3 years I raised them alone. 3 years I told myself I was nothing to you, that I had been replaceable. You weren't. I know that now. Her voice broke on now. And that's worse, Soren, because at least when I believed you betrayed me, I knew who to be angry at. And now, she stopped, pressed her hand over her mouth, breathed. Now I don't know what to do with any of it. He stood slowly, giving her every opportunity to stop him. She didn't. You don't have to do anything tonight. You don't have to forgive me, or trust me, or let me pass this porch. Then what are you asking for? He held her gaze, and in his expression she read something she had not expected. Not power, not control, but a raw, unguarded yielding that cost him visibly to maintain. "Time," he said. "Just time. To be here. To know them. To prove what I'm telling you is true with every day I show up and don't leave." The wind came off the water carrying salt and the smell of the harbor at low tide. She did not answer. But somewhere inside her, where the anger had been anchored for 3 years, something had come loose. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the willingness to let the question remain open. For now, that was enough. It did not happen all at once. Nothing worth surviving ever does. He found a room at the inn near the harbor. Stripped himself of every marker of his former life, no calls to the city, no updates on operations. For the first time, he had nothing to do except be present. And presence, he discovered, was the hardest thing he had ever attempted. The children came to him on their own terms. Veda decided first with absolute conviction. On the third day, she appeared at his door with a ceramic bowl she had painted herself lopsided, glazed in aggressive purple, and handed it to him like a diplomat presenting a treaty. "This is for your food," she announced. "So you stop forgetting to eat." He took it with both hands, and something in his chest rearranged itself so fundamentally he was not sure it would ever return to its original configuration. Emmerich took longer. Weeks of watching, positioning himself at the edges of rooms. He did not ask questions or offer gifts. He simply reduced the distance in increments so small they were almost invisible, until one afternoon, without prelude, he sat beside Soren on the harbor wall and stayed for an hour, saying nothing, watching the boats, sharing a silence that felt like the beginning of a language only they would speak. Saris watched from careful distance. She did not intervene or encourage, but she was watching, and what she saw did not match the man she had run from. He walked Veda to the workshop mornings, her hand gripping two of his fingers while she delivered monologues about sandcastles, the injustice of bedtimes, and her firm belief that seagulls were plotting something. He listened with the attention he once reserved for men whose decisions moved markets. He sat with Emmerich evenings, working through puzzles the boy produced from his pockets like a magician who had replaced wonder with engineering. He engaged with the precision Emmerich's mind required, and the boy responded to that respect in ways words would have failed. He was learning them, not as heirs, not as possessions, but as people. The night the sea turned was the night everything shifted for the final time. The tide rose past the harbor wall an hour early, flooding the lower road. Veda was outside. She had slipped through the back door during the 10 seconds between Saris turning away and turning back. She had gone to check on a tide pool she'd been monitoring, a collection of creatures she had named and visited with the dedication of a field researcher. The tide pool was gone. The water was rising. And Veda, ankle-deep in water climbing toward her knees, was too fascinated by the chaos to be afraid. Soren reached her first. He had been watching the water from the inn window with the instincts of a man who had spent his life reading environments for threat, and he had started moving before the first shout left anyone's mouth. He waded in without hesitation and lifted Veda out with one arm, pulling her against his chest while she protested she hadn't finished counting the crabs. When he carried her to solid ground, Saris was there, soaking, breathing hard, her face carrying an expression that contained terror and relief, and something else, the last wall she had been maintaining, finally deciding it no longer served a purpose. She took Veda from his arms, pressed her face into her daughter's wet hair. Then she looked at him. Not through him, not past him, at him. "Thank you." 2 words carrying the weight of 3 years and every decision she had made alone. He nodded. That was all. He did not leverage the moment. That restraint was what broke her open. That night, after the children were asleep, she found him on the harbor wall watching the sea under the stars. She sat beside him, close enough that the distance between them was no longer a statement, but a question. "I don't know how to trust you again," she said. "I know. It might take years. I have them. You might not like who I've become." He turned, and in his eyes she saw not longing, not possessive intensity, but gratitude. Simple, immense, unbearable gratitude for the fact that she was sitting beside him at all. "I already do," he said. She did not kiss him. She did not take his hand. She simply stayed, allowing the silence between them to become something other than a barrier. It became a bridge. The ceremony happened on a morning in late spring, in the garden behind the workshop where Zora grew herbs that smelled like the beginning of something. No guests who measured worth in territory. Zora stood as witness, hands still dusted with clay. Hedion was there. A few neighbors who had watched this story unfold without ever asking for the chapters they were not offered. Veda wore a dress she had chosen herself white with small yellow flowers and spent the ceremony explaining to Emmerich in a loud whisper that this was very important and he should stop examining the beetle on his shoe. Emmerich ignored her with the practiced ease of a boy who had learned that his sister's volume was not proportional to the importance of her message. Soren spoke 3 sentences, quiet enough that only Saris could hear them. Saris did not respond with words. She closed the last inch of distance, rested her forehead against his chest, and let out a breath she had been holding for 3 years, 5 months, and a number of days she had finally stopped counting. It was not a fairy tale. It was not a restoration of what had been. It was something harder and rarer and more honest. It was 2 people broken by the same lie, choosing to build something new. Not because the past had been erased, but because the future was worth more than the anger it would cost to stay in it. And in a small town on the edge of the Atlantic, where the fog rolled in each morning and the tides kept their own counsel, a family scattered by deception quietly, stubbornly, and without anyone's permission, chose to begin again.